We've talked about the tree of life, how we group animals based on their similarities, how we understand how animals or all organisms can reproduce and evolve based on natural selection and mutations to become different species, different organisms. And a common term for that, if we were to put that idea onto paper, would be the tree of life. The more correct term in science is a phylogenetic tree. So a phylogenetic tree is the way we draw and think of life evolving through time. Right? What animal evolved in, or what organism evolved into what organism evolved into what organism through time, right? And in what location. Okay. Now, the idea of a phylogenetic tree, the idea of evolution, even though scientists first started to talk about it in the 1800s, was not very well accepted at that time. And that's partly because humans don't live for very long, right? On average, we live like 70-ish years. That means that it's not long enough for any single human to see evolution occurring. Even if you talk to your grandparents, your great-grandparents, we don't collectively live long enough to see this evolution happening because evolution takes millions of years, right? Which is why we need the fossil record, right? We were only able to prove that evolution existed when we had enough fossils that we could see this progression that happened over millions of years when humans weren't around to observe it. So for example, the skeletons you see here are of the different types of horses. And I want you to think, what do you notice about how these fossils change over time? They do look like they slowly change as a progression through time, right? Starting with Mesohippus, moving to Merychippus, Pliohippus, Equus. But what changes happen? What do you notice? So that one of the very first skeleton you saw down there, that was a small browsing animal from the Upper Paleocene, so I think like 56 million years ago, named Rodinskia, which is presently considered the earliest relative to the horse. And unlike modern horses, which are big, have single hooves, graze in grassy fields, the original horses had 4 toes on their front feet, 3 toes on their back feet, and they were actually padded like a dog's foot would be. Rather than living in grassy fields, they lived in the forest, and they were really short, so they browsed on leaves and shrubs. They also had low-crowned teeth that were typical of leaf eaters, right? Because they didn't eat grass back then, they ate leaves. So through evolution, this small animal that lived in the forest and had pads with many toes slowly evolved into what we now think of as the horse, right? Their toes fused together. Or actually, they didn't quite fuse together. The outer toes shrank and came back, so only one big toe was left in the middle. Their legs lengthened, their more complex teeth developed to eat grass, their skulls lengthened. And right, we see this evolution in the geologic record, in the fossil record. Okay, so it's actually really neat thinking about how our limbs evolved and our hands evolved, because we see in the horses how they evolved from having multiple toes and short legs to just one toe, one hoof, and a long leg. And we see those bones slowly varying through time. And when we look at a lot of different organisms, we see these same bones that are just different lengths, different thicknesses, slightly different orientation, but it's all the same bones. Right? So this shows us that we likely all came from a single ancestor, right? But those bones were able to evolve in different ways. The structure of them were evolved in different ways. But in 4-limbed vertebrates, we all share a very similar limb formation of our bones, right? We see it in birds, we see it in horses, we see it in whales, right? Their flippers used to be what our limbs are, right? So just another really cool example of how we know that the form of our body and the form of other mammals' bodies come from a single ancestor.